We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Monday edition of Point of View. Hope you had a great weekend. We've got quite a lineup this week of great guests and interviews. Matter of fact, even today, going to talk a little bit about Doge and some of the back and forth on that. Then we'll get into the fact that the president established a Bitcoin strategic reserve. Then we're going to get into a very good series of articles that appeared in the March issue of World Magazine, The Censorship Machine. And an individual that has written that is Emma Freire. She's been on the program with us before. We'll get into that. And then next hour, for those of you that love science and intelligent design and creation, we'll be talking with Pastor Rob Pacienza as well as Tom DeRosa on the case for creation, the fact that there is this Creation Studies Institute, which at one time used to be associated with Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church and the Coral Ridge Ministries, now has come back again. So we'll get into what that might mean, both theologically and scientifically. And, of course, all through the program, if you have a comment or a question, we'll open up those phones a little bit later to give you a chance to join the conversation. Let's start off with Elon Musk. We're going to come back to that a little bit later, but certainly the first article I've posted by Jeffrey Blahar, Donald Trump pulls up hard on Elon Musk. Okay, probably about time that it needed to take place. And Jeffrey Blahar puts it this way, after doing some introductory material, saying after about a month and a half of chaos, much of it done with great online fanfare, but seemingly little substantive gain, Donald Trump has officially clamped the reins on Elon Musk and Doge. That would be the Department of Government Efficiency, and he's pulling up hard. Politico, for example, has reported that what you see here is the fact that President Donald Trump convened his cabinet in person on Thursday to deliver a message: you're in charge of your departments, not Elon Musk. There are a lot of reports coming out now about some back and forth between Elon Musk and Marco Rubio and a variety of others. I won't get into all the names and all the people, but the point was made very clearly by President Trump that cabinet secretaries should make final decisions on personnel, policy, and even the pacing of the implementation. There have been some that say we appreciate what Elon Musk and really what the government is trying to do and what the president is trying to do, what the cabinet is trying to do, but maybe it's going too fast. And so that is part of it. And again, I have to applaud Donald Trump by having Elon Musk there rather than say it when he's not there. And he joined the conversation. That is, Elon Musk joined the conversation and said he was on board with the directive from President Trump. And according to at least one person in the meeting, Elon Musk acknowledged that Doge had made some missteps, a message he shared earlier in the week with members of Congress. So again, those are concerns that some people have raised, and that is the case. As Jeffrey Blahar goes on and takes on one other issue, he says, as far as Trump is concerned, Musk has gone too far, created too many unnecessary messes, and comported himself too clumsily in both public and private to be allowed the kind of unfettered power he has heretofore reveled in. Yesterday marked his official neutering, it says, in a meeting attended by every cabinet member, lest there be any doubt. And it goes on to say that the story isn't over because we'll see whether or not Elon Musk has done any real long-term good once things finally shake out, and perhaps if he reforms his own worst impulses, because in this case, Jeffrey Blahar says, what I've seen for the most part has been minuscule, often fake savings to justify such confidence to date. I have said this before, but it's worth saying again. I brought it up on Friday. Warren Kelly ran some of the numbers, and I'll just give you an idea. When people complain, For example, write this down, cutting 400 people out of the FAA. That sounds like a lot until you realize there's 45,000 employees at the FAA. So that represents 89 100ths%, or about 8 or 9/10%, however you want to look at it. And so it's not very significant in the light of all sorts of other individuals. You hear the same thing about Homeland Security. Let 405 people go, some of whom just simply decided to retire. But okay, whatever your number is, 405, however that came about. But Homeland Security has 260,000 individuals. That's 16 100ths%, or less than 0.2%, however you want to round it off. And the point I'm making is, first of all, there have been a lot of people on the side of Donald Trump that have made a big deal about the cuts, and so far, pretty small. But on the other side, again, it just causes me to shake my head that Democrats are going to the mat on some of this over cuts that are very insignificant so far. And, of course, the greater cuts are going to come from, what do you think? Entitlement. That would be Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. It's going to come from Health and Human Services. It's going to come from the Defense Department. That accounts for a disproportionate amount of the federal spending. And so, again, on the one hand, some people are cheering it, and I'm not against it, but I just say it's still fairly small compared to what needs to be done if we really want to even come close to balancing a budget. But even more troubling, because, again, a lot of that hasn't even happened yet, is the fact that so many Democrats and Democratic leaders think that this is the hill to die on when many of those individuals have voluntarily retired. Yeah, there have been some glitches where one person was sent home and they were brought back again, sent home again. Okay, mistakes have been made. Everybody understands that. But it is amazing to me that this has generated so much. But let's go on and talk about a few other issues. Number one, you might remember one of the first targets of Doge and of Elon Musk was, of course, the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID. And I pointed out a couple of weeks ago that the decision was made to put USAID under the State Department, under Secretary of State Marco Rubio. Well, he has announced today, after a 6-week review, we are officially canceling 83% of the programs at USAID. The 5,200 contracts that are now canceled spent tens of billions of dollars in ways that did not serve, and in some cases harmed, the core national interests of the United States. But he goes on to say, in consultation with Congress, we intend to, for the remaining 18%, and I think it'd be 17% if the other part was 18th, but anyway, 18%, probably rounding off there, we are keeping approximately 1,000 of those programs, and they will be administered more effectively under the State Department. So again, even though there was a shouting match between Marco Rubio and Elon Musk, he actually says thank you to Doge and our hardworking staff who worked very long hours to achieve this overdue and historic reform. So, are some things happening? Yes. Are we balancing the budget with them? Not yet. Maybe never, but we'll give it a try. Are there some things that needed to be killed? Yes. It is amazing to me that when you have individuals going through USAID, they conclude that 83% of the programs either did not serve the core interests of the United States or in some cases actually were harming the interest of the United States. So good news, things are happening. Do we need to do more? I think you know the answer to that one as well. Let's take a break. We have a lot more to cover. We'll do that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a phrase I sometimes use on radio. It's difficult to solve a problem when politicians won't even admit there's a problem. This is true about our national debt, but it's also true about America's health. We can't solve America's health problems if we won't admit that Americans are unhealthy. The confirmation of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. may be changing our mindset, but we still need to understand the depth of the healthcare problem in America. We've heard that America is a first world country facing third world health issues. When you hear that, it sounds too extreme. Is that true? You can read an article in the Annual Review of Public Health that attempts to answer why do Americans have shorter life expectancy and worse health than people in other high-income countries. It's even worse for poor Americans. One research paper on life expectancy in the United States says this: the poorest men in the U.S. have life expectancies comparable to men in Sudan and Pakistan. The richest men in the U.S. live longer than the average man in any country. A CDC research paper documents that 6 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic disease, and 4 in 10 have 2 or more chronic diseases. And it's worth mentioning that chronic disease may account for as much as 3/4 of America's healthcare spending. Another study in the New England Journal of Medicine on the prevalence of adult obesity and severe obesity made this ominous prediction. The researchers estimated by 2030 nearly half of U.S. adults will be obese. These statistics and many others illustrate the need to address the health of Americans. There are solutions to the problem, but the first step is to admit that there's a problem and understand the depth of our healthcare problem. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, our first article today is called Decorum is Dead. And I bring it up, one, to remind us of the fact that last Tuesday there was a lack of decorum in Congress. But more importantly, I think the way Beckett Adams does a comparison reminds us that once again we see that if indeed a Republican breaks decorum, the press, at least the mainstream press, covers it very different than if a Democrat does. And again, he goes on to the fact that, first of all, we're getting a little too used to heckling that is taking place. Again, he says Democratic legislators behaved atrociously last week during President Trump's joint session of Congress, booing, heckling, and staging performative walkouts. Speaker Mike Johnson had to instruct the Sergeant of Arms to remove Democratic Representative Al Green from the chamber when the Texas lawmaker refused to stop creating disruptions, waving his cane around and shouting inaudibly about Medicaid. The point that he makes, though, is that look at the way the Associated Press, the New York Times, and The Guardian, as well as others, covered this. They talked about how this registered dissent, or it was a rowdy speech, or there was simply Democrat fight back. And he says, compare that to 2009 when President Barack Obama was in Congress speaking about health care reform and talking about the reforms that were in the Affordable Care Act, and went on to then say that those reforms would not apply to those who are here illegally. Well, at that point, South Carolina Republican Representative Joe Wilson couldn't contain himself and just shouted out, "You lie." That's all he said. It was at the time condemned by us on the program, by Republican leaders, and, of course, by the press, because this is what the Associated Press said. Recognize this Associated Press that referred to the outbursts last Tuesday as dissent. But the Associated Press back in 2009 referred to the statement by Wilson, all of 2 words, as an extraordinary breach of congressional decorum. As a matter of fact, you had all sorts of other news items. Of course, you have the Guardian here talking about trying to bring in the racist idea because Obama cannot escape the sound and fury over the color of his skin. Even Jimmy Carter, who, of course, we just laid to rest, said the truth lies in years of Southern prejudice and a simmering resentment among some Americans that a black man could become president. And, at the time, it was quite a bit of a hubbub. Some of you might not remember that. I do. And to give him credit, President Obama said, look, at the time, I'm a big believer that we all make mistakes. He, that would be Joe Wilson, apologized quickly without equivocation. I'm appreciative of that. But for those of you that are keeping score at home, it turns out Joe Wilson was right. And that is, you can go to the Department of Health and Human Services award, actually just 2 years later, 2011, awarded $28.8 million grant to community health centers, earmarking established a good portion of that, $8.5 million of it, for migrant and seasonal workers. So the statement being made by the time was incorrect. It was probably even at the time known to not be accurate. But the person that got torched, of course, was Joe Wilson for saying you lie. And I think at the time that was inappropriate. But how much more a person standing in the well of the House of Representatives, waving his cane, boos and catcalls and heckling, basically decorum is dead. And I think that's a really sad commentary on what has happened in America and illustrative of the fact that we've got this loss of civility that has taken place. And if you don't think so, just get in your car and drive down the freeway a little bit, and you'll see some other examples of it. Or stand in line in a checkout area. I mean, you will see all sorts of incivility unfolding before our very eyes. But let me just bring on 2 other stories here that I think are of significance. And that is, first of all, the Heritage Foundation has what is called the Oversight Project. And they have been looking at the executive orders signed by President Joe Biden. And they have now concluded that every signed document that they had examined wasn't signed by President Joe Biden, but instead was signed by an auto pen. Are you ready for this? Now, let's again give President Trump credit for having the cameras rolling while he's signing the executive order. And the only exception that they could find was the actual announcement, which he did sign, which said he was dropping out of the presidential race. But all these other executive orders were signed by an auto pen. And, of course, it's caused other people to say, who has been making the decisions behind the scenes, when it's pretty obvious, as we've told some of the stories on this program, coming from people like a Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, that President Biden oftentimes did not know what he was supposedly signing. And, of course, he didn't actually sign them. The auto pen signed it. And so that's just one more example of that. Lest we need any more Doge examples, I thought I'd just put one more on the table. We've got quite a few, but this one comes from the Department of Homeland Security, in which the department has announced that it will end collective bargaining on all Transportation Security Administration employees. And the reason is too many TSA employees were gaming the system. Now, I do know people that work for TSA, and I think they're very outstanding individuals, so I'm not painting with a broad brush. But the Department of Homeland Security noted that over 60% of TSA workers with poor performance records were allowed to stay employed, and they basically blamed the union for hindering the TSA from getting rid of those bad employees. And at the same time, they were also taking advantage of various benefit programs while they were working. So we do have, again, all sorts of reasons for why Doge should be there, or maybe reasons why Congress should have done it in the first place, but here we are. One last thing I thought I'd mention just real quickly, and we have posted this. President Trump has created a Bitcoin strategic reserve, and interestingly enough, also in that executive order establishes another one, which would be a reserve that just simply holds other cryptocurrency. And the bottom line on some of this is simply that individuals don't make a distinction between Bitcoin, which, all sorts of organizations, but the SEC refers to as a commodity. The others are, I think, illegal securities. The other day, Rachel Maddow just lumped all cryptos together and said they operate on the same idea of hoping someday people will think they're worth a lot of money, and compared Bitcoin, of all things, to Beanie Babies. How you could say that with a straight face. Bitcoin has a market cap of $1.7 trillion. BlackRock, Fidelity. I mean, you can go through a very long list. The Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Commerce. These are not people that you would say are gamblers or people that are speculating on Beanie Babies, but anybody's allowed to have their own opinion. They're just not allowed to have their own facts. But nevertheless, the commentary I have coming out next week will get into that in some detail, because indeed that gives the opportunity for the Department of Treasury to then capitalize on the Bitcoin that is owned by the federal government. How did they get that? Well, that comes from criminal asset forfeitures, civil asset forfeiture proceedings. And so the idea is that that will be kept and will not be sold off. And as a result, could be a way to begin to provide an increasing asset to offset the increasing deficit or national debt that we have right now. And so again, this is just another one of those particular promises that candidate Donald Trump made of wanting to make U.S. the crypto capital of the world. And so that is the case. And so we'll see where that goes. There are proponents of it. Well, that's quite a bit of the people in the cabinet. Are there some opponents? Well, yeah, there's some that don't believe it will work. But even of the opponents, there's some people that believe that it will work, and they're not real thrilled about it, because if indeed that does and is as successful as some suggest it might be, it might, in a sense, offset our national debt, and that would be, unfortunately, from their perspective, rewarding bad behavior that comes from decades and decades of members of Congress spending more than they take in, and a Federal Reserve that had to go print the money to try to balance the budget. So anyway, just wanted to announce that particular decision that has come down, and there are a lot of executive orders. And the good news is we have actually seen President Trump signing them, and oftentimes having somebody explain them even before he signs them. But unfortunately, it looks like the auto pen was signing a lot of those executive orders for President Biden. Let's take a break, though. We're going to get into this issue of censorship, the cover story of World Magazine, the censorship machine. We're going to talk about that right after these important messages.
Have you ever met a child you knew would do great things? They displayed remarkable imagination, understanding, and a zest for learning. Now imagine someone takes that child and instead of fostering their potential with a real education, they feed them nothing but lies. You know, that scenario isn't so far from reality. From a young age, Americans are fed a consistent stream of distorted facts, from the secular indoctrination they receive in many public schools, to the biases presented as fact in many colleges and universities, to the barrage of misinformation from the mainstream media and the lack of moral grounding in our society. It's not that Americans aren't capable of understanding the truth, it's that they aren't exposed to it enough. You can expose more Americans to the truth when you give to Point of View, where listeners receive facts, perspective, and biblical truth they don't get from society. As long as we have truth, we have hope. Give today at pointofview.net or call 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
One of the topics we address so often here on Point of View is the issue of censorship. Here's our booklet that came out just a couple of months ago on censorship. And of course, you might remember that we've done some interviews. A while back, we had Ken Buck on. I'm holding up his book called Crushed. And then we also have, of course, the one by Josh Hawley on the tyranny of big tech. So this is an issue that we certainly have been covering for some time. But the March issue of World Magazine, the cover issue, is entitled The Censorship Machine, Media, Government, and Big Tech Teamed Up to Suppress Truth. Can Trump Dismantle Their Regime? One of the articles by Emma Freire is entitled Crushing Dissent. We do have a digital version of that on the website you can read. Also, there is another one that she has written as well on the issue of Elon Musk's unexpected retreat, and then one by Elizabeth Russell on free speech fundraising. So quite a bit of material that we'll try to cover, but mostly focus on the article we've posted. And if you're not subscribing to World Magazine, my organization does receive that. This is my copy right now. But again, you can also receive it digitally, and I think you're going to certainly benefit from that. Emma Freire's been with us. She is a senior writer at World Magazine, lives in Maryland, and is an individual that has written two of these articles. So welcome back to Point of View.
Thanks for having me back.
You start with the story about the election in which during the 2024 election there was a map, which, interesting enough, was created by Real Clear Politics, and I quote from them quite often here on Point of View. And the map just gave a pretty good estimate on what would happen in terms of the election. Turned out to be exactly right. It showed Trump winning 312 electoral college votes, Kamala Harris winning 226. But just trying to put out factual information led to censorship. Tell us the rest of the story, if you might.
Right. So the Real Clear Politics poll average is a poll average that they've been making for 20 years now, every election cycle. It's proven to be remarkably accurate. They don't actually take their own poll. They just produce an average of other polls. They've looked at which polls have been accurate, and those are the ones that they include in their average. It sounds straightforward enough, but to the chagrin of some parties, their polling average was predicting a Trump victory. It was actually a smaller victory than the one that Trump eventually had. But simply suggesting that Trump might win wasn't only inaccurate, it seemed to be dangerous to some people. So on October 31st, the New York Times published an article suggesting it was part of an effort to, quote, deflate enthusiasm among Democrats. And it was possible Harris was going to have a huge win, and then Trump might use the RCP poll average as a basis for disputing the results. So the New York Times wrote this, nasty hit piece, and then Wikipedia, which normally has a page with a number of different polls and poll aggregators, they actually removed the RCP average from their chart showing poll averages, and one of their editors accused RCP of having a, quote, strong Republican bias. And so,
which is not true.
It was silent.
Yes, go ahead.
So it was just simply suggesting Trump might win was censored.
One of the things that I thought was very interesting in your article is you also talk about Catherine Mayer, who later became CEO of NPR. But even when at Wikipedia talked about the fact that really Wikipedia sort of gave up on its free and open mantra. And so for individuals, especially I warn young people that want to do research for a term paper, Wikipedia may not be as open and objective as you might think. And there's a good illustration of it, isn't there?
Yes, well, we've seen that in many fronts now with Wikipedia, but that video really crystallized what a lot of people were suspecting, that it's deeply biased. She basically, Wikipedia's original mantra was to be, quote, free and open, but she got rid of that when she was in charge because she said it led to too much emphasis on this white male, westernized construct around who matters. So she basically said that being, free and open led to results that were not free and open. it was absurd. But unfortunately, it's it's not just one isolated case of bias. It's just part of a much deeper, more entrenched system.
Let's, if we can, talk about the title. Of course, I know you may not have necessarily picked the title for the cover of World Magazine, The Censorship Machine, but I think it is appropriate because we also, in your article, have how Congress created the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, and there have been attempts to actually weaponize this. And when I use the word machine, Michael Schellenberger talks about the industrial machine, this whole idea that really there is an attempt on the part of the government working through maybe social media, since the government cannot censor speech, but they can encourage individuals that have social media platforms to censor speech. And so this idea of an industrial complex censorship machine seems to have some validity, don't you think?
Yes, absolutely. What he discovered when he had access to Twitter files was just this web of censorship that was so vast it almost defies comprehension. And there's so many different groups involved. There's nonprofits, there's the government, there's groups receiving public funding, and they're all working in tandem to censor disfavored opinions.
Just incredible. One other one that I wanted to get to as well, and that is PragerU. We've had Dennis Prager in studio. We've had him by phone. We've more than once mentioned and encouraged people to watch PragerU videos. And as you point out, there is probably one of the best examples of the attempt to try to censor PragerU, which has led to various hearings in front of Congress and all the rest. So again, what did you find out in that regard? Because it does seem to me, looking at not only PragerU, but some of the people working with Alliance Defending Freedom, and we have the vice president of ADF oftentimes on this program as well, they are actually able to, again, document some of the censorship that's been taking place.
Yeah, so censorship seems to be almost a daily headache for them. Their staff members who I talked to told me that it's gotten a lot worse since 2016, which lines up with the timeline that I learned about. Censorship of American people really kicked off after Trump's election victory and after Brexit. There was this reaction against populism by the global elite. And so PragerU really experienced that, specifically in election years. It seems to increase. So there was one particularly blatant example that I mentioned in my story. June 2024, they published one of their many documentaries, Dear Infidels, A Warning to America. They interviewed a Palestinian man who talked about growing up in Gaza and how a teacher came in and told him some horrible things about Jews, that this was being taught in the schools there. And surprisingly, Google labeled the documentary hate speech, but not towards Jews, towards Muslims. And not only the offending documentary, but PragerU's entire app was removed from Google Play, which is one of the world's largest app stores. So fortunately at PragerU, they're very experienced at dealing with this, and they have a very, very large following. So they just jumped right into action, got their followers to contact Google. They got media coverage, so they pushed back. And then Google reversed course a couple days later and told them it was, a mistake, which which PragerU doesn't believe, because it just happens too often, and companies like Google just have policies that permit that. They're very opaque, and really until those policies change, it's hard to believe these are mistakes.
Well, and the other part of that is because PragerU has a very large following and a very significant budget, which is 10, 20 times the budget of this radio program, they can marshal money, resources, and sources. I know we've been on YouTube timeout at different times and all the rest, but I think the point that I would make, Emma, is that many individuals that are maybe social media influencers who don't have that kind of reach, don't have the ability to challenge Google or any other particular outreach or YouTube, they find themselves just deplatformed, or they find their particular videos censored or something like that, or demonetized. And so in some respects, what happened to PragerU, you can say, well, they eventually were able to rectify the problem, but think of all the individuals that don't have the resources to begin to challenge challenge groups like YouTube and Google.
Yes, absolutely. That's a huge problem. Craig Strazzeri, the chief marketing officer at Prager, he was telling me that conservative influencers who he's spoken to have just told him honestly that there are certain topics that they avoid because they know they'll get deplatformed and they rely on income from these platforms. So it promotes self-censorship as well, that's very unfortunate that that's the outcome of some of these policies.
Let's take a break. When we come back, again, we're talking about the cover issue this month of March of the World magazine, The Censorship Machine, Media, Government, and Big Tech. We'll come back and talk about Elon Musk. First of all, purchased Twitter, so we have the Twitter files, but then also social media platform X went dark in Brazil. What happened there? We'll talk about that right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again as we are talking about this idea of censorship, looking at this first article, Crushing Dissent in the Censorship Machine. And Emma, one of the things that we discovered after the 2020 election, and you refer to it as well, is our friends at the Media Research Center went back and asked individuals in 7 swing states, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. We actually have radio programs in every one of those states. and they asked the voters about some of the key stories, one of which, of course, was Hunter Biden's laptop, which was actually censored. And they found that at least 17% of these Biden voters, individuals that voted for Joe Biden instead of voting for Donald Trump, said they would have abandoned the Democratic candidate if they had those facts. And if you actually run the numbers, that means that actually you would have reelected Donald Trump. So when people say, well, what's the harm of censorship? Sometimes some of this just doesn't need to get out. It could have affected the 2020 election. And even, as you mentioned a minute ago, even changing and deciding whether or not to run a map could have affected the 2024 election. But we now know a lot more than we knew back then because, as you point out, in 2022, Elon Musk purchased Twitter, now called X, and we now have the Twitter files. And I mentioned a minute ago Michael Schellenberger and others, and Barry Weiss, who actually went through that. And as they began to go through it, they recognized that there was a connection between the federal government and social media. In particular, this would be Twitter, and as a result, using social media to censor things which you would not be allowed to do if you were the federal government.
Yes, they're delegating, essentially violating the First Amendment.
And so when you do that, you are not going to be held accountable. We had a Supreme Court case that went there, but apparently these justices didn't think that was enough to deal with that issue. But what you have here are just all sorts of good examples of how that takes place. But you point out that censorship oftentimes takes different forms: remove, reduce, or inform. And sometimes all you have to do is just not lead with a story, or so bury the story in terms of a file that you're looking for on Google or YouTube that essentially you don't even have to censor it. It's just never going to be seen by the average viewer or listener, is it?
Right. That's the reduce part. So it's a fairly simple form of censorship. You don't actually remove it. That's too draconian, or stop a fact check on it. You just make it so that almost nobody sees it.
Right.
You would probably just have to navigate to that person's page. PragerU was telling me that they have, almost 1 million followers, and then some of their posts on X before Elon Musk took it over would get like 50 views. That's just impossible. So it was clear that the reach was being reduced. This also happened to Dr. Jay Bhattacharya,
yes,
who is now going to be likely to be head of the NIH.
And again, I think that is a helpful illustration as well, because as we talked about with you in the previous interviews and in your articles in World Magazine, a lot of that has to do with the pandemic, the lockdown, and the rest. But I thought we'd take one other article. We didn't post this one, but people can go to World Magazine and see it, and that is the unexpected retreat. We started today by talking about Elon Musk and Doge, and of course, I just mentioned a minute ago about purchasing X, or what at the time was called Twitter, but there was a standoff, if you will, between Elon Musk and the platform X and Brazil. And in this particular case, even though Elon Musk has been a free speech platform, I think it illustrates when you bring too much pressure, sometimes there is a tendency for free speech advocates to back down. Tell us more if you might.
Yes, unfortunately, Brazil has been on a bad path in the past couple of years, in particular due to the outsized role played by a Supreme Court justice named Alexandre de Moraes. He and the fellow Supreme Court justices have given themselves an enormous amount of power to investigate what they call fake news. They actually gave themselves this power after a Brazilian magazine published an article linking the wife of the Chief Justice to a corruption scandal. And this, they've been investigating news outlets for so-called fake news, and that's had a huge chilling effect on the work of journalists and freedom of the press. And so Alexandre de Moraes started issuing secret orders to X and to other social media platforms, demanding that some posts be removed, some accounts be banned. And X started pushing back against that. It's appalling that basically all the other social media platforms just fully complied, but X tried to push back a little bit, and then the standoff grew more and more intense. And then at a certain point, Alexandre Alexandre de Moraes took this very unprecedented step of actually shutting down access to X in Brazil. And if it's possible to still access X using what's called a virtual private network, which many Brazilians use, but Alexandre de Moraes said that if anyone was caught using that, they would face a fine of $9,000 a day. So it was this very, very heavy-handed tactic. Brazilians would log in to X, and there would just not be a page there. And everyone was wondering what on earth was going to happen. But after about a month, it seemed like X and Elon Musk complied. They, of course, Brazil's a large market, represents a lot of revenue, and so they agreed to meet de Moraes' demands and to pay fines. So X is back now. So this was a confusing moment for a lot of Brazilians. I know I've heard different opinions from Brazilians. Some feel quite disappointed because, some Brazilians were actually organizing rallies, in support of free speech against de Moraes. So they were trying to show their support, and then, X decided to reverse course. But others, are just sort of taking a wait and see approach. X is still significantly more free than other social media platforms in Brazil. So they're still happy to have it back, and they think maybe the calculation from Elon Musk and the other leadership at X is just that they want to give the Brazilian people a platform that is, that is still significantly freer than the others that they have access to.
Very good. Let me just mention, just before we run out of time, that we do have a link to your website, emmafreire.wordpress.com. You don't have to remember all that because it is on our website, pointofview.net. Has the articles we've talked with you about before, collateral damage, patients that were injured by COVID-19, all the way up to, of course, these getting into a number of other issues. And I would also encourage people to go to World Magazine because that is a great way. You can click on the one there that has Crushing Dissent. You can read most of it there, or you go to WNG.org, worldmagazine.org, and you can find out a little bit more. It is worth your subscription. And again, some great research that has been done, especially by you. And I wanted to let people know about the fact that the March issue, the censorship machine, media, government, and big tech teamed up to suppress truth. Can Trump dismantle their regime? Well, we'll find out in due course. Also, a very good article as well about if you ever wanted to do crowdfunding, there are better organizations than others that you might want to know about, and that information is on that particular article as well. So lots of material, and Emma, thank you for joining us once again here on Point of View.
Thank you for having me.
Going to take a break. When we come back, I'm going to change topics once again, and we're going to get into the whole issue of creation, evolution, intelligent design, arguments for the existence of God. Going to be talking with a number of individuals. Dr. Robert Pacienza, who is the senior pastor at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church, also now is the CEO and president of Coral Ridge Ministries, founder of the Institute for Faith and Culture. We'll also be talking with Tom DeRosa, who is the director and founder of the Creation Studies Institute. I think you'll enjoy that conversation, and that's coming up right after this.
If you appreciate the trustworthy news and biblical worldview that you hear on Point of View, would you consider joining our team, the Truth Team? Listeners like you have been the backbone of Point of View for 53 years. But today there are more voices competing for Americans' attention than ever before, and few of them are anchored to biblical truth. By joining Point of View's Truth Team, you can be an integral part of keeping truth on the air. In just a few weeks, Point of View will celebrate Truth Team Week. But you don't have to wait till then. You can join the Truth Team right now and help us get a head start on our $150,000 spring fundraising goal. If you appreciate Point of View, please join the Truth Team. Join today by visiting us online at pointofview.net. Or you can call toll-free 1-800-347-5151. pointofview.net and 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
I do appreciate Point of View and what you folks are doing. You really are doing a great job to educate and to help Christian folks do a better job to honor Christ in all that we do.
My husband and I are your supporters. We just really appreciate the show and the people you bring on.
I just want to commend you guys on your program. I love listening to you. It's a blessing. Been listening to you for several years. Your program has helped my family see current events and elections and politics through the eyes and the principles of Scripture. And that's been enlightening, and we're trying to pass that on to others.
I want to say, first of all, that I really enjoyed the Millennial Roundtable, and I love the program altogether. I think Kerby is great, and I really appreciate all of y'all, all that y'all do, and the truth that y'all put out.
Hey, great show. Love all your comments and what you're talking about.
Thanks again for what you do.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Let's start this hour with a few questions. Where did we come from? Why are the earth, the sun, and the universe even here in the first place? And how did life arise on this planet? You know, these are some of the fundamental philosophical questions that we always need to deal with. And of course, they have very strong scientific implications. The theory of evolution rests on the assumption that life arose on this planet by chance, that all the cosmos is a result of a material cause, and as a result, that is what is taught in public schools around the country. Oftentimes what is even taught in various Christian schools or Christian colleges, but simply then saying, well, even though we believe in evolution, we'll say God is behind it, which is, of course, what is known as theistic evolution. But does the scientific evidence really support that? You know, evolutionists, of course, say that it does, but there are other views that are challenging that. Matter of fact, there are even some that challenge it that are within, say, an evolutionary idea, that maybe reject the so-called neo-Darwinian hypothesis. But one of the things that we have talked about oftentimes here on Point of View is this idea of intelligent design, that if you were just to try to maybe remove your theological binders and maybe some of your blinders and maybe some of your assumptions, maybe your evolutionary assumptions or whatever, you would start saying that there sure seems to be a lot of evidence for design. Now, we are not surprised by that, because in Romans 1, the Apostle Paul makes that very strong case, but there seems to be quite a bit of evidence that indeed we see all sorts of complex biological systems that have a great deal of information within them. We have talked about before various conversations about whether or not when we look into the stars and whether we look at the galaxies, whether or not they all seem to be finely tuned. And so in some respects, we certainly would come to that conclusion even apart from revelation. And so one of the things we're going to spend some time this hour talking about is, do we have evidence for a belief in creation, or is all the evidence in one way or another pointing in the other direction towards a material origin of the universe? Let me bring two individuals to the conversation. The first one is Dr. Robert Pacienza, who is the senior pastor at Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church right there in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He also is the CEO and president of Coral Ridge Ministries and the founder of the Institute for Faith and Culture. Might mention we saw him last week at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention, and he is a board member there as well. A graduate of Samford University, Knox Theological Seminary, Westminster Theological Seminary, and an individual that has certainly been able to articulate these theological and even scientific issues. So, Rob, welcome back to Point of View.
Hey, thanks so much for having me on.
What I wanted to do is maybe have you kind of address that issue for just a minute, because I began by saying if you could just take off your blinders for a little bit, your assumptions. You do see a lot of evidence in nature And that seems to be the argument that we get in Romans 1 from Paul. It's also the argument we get in the Old Testament. The heavens declare the glory of God. And so it seems to me that Christians don't have to apologize for believing in creation. If anything, we should be looking at our non-Christian friends and saying, in all this design, do you really believe it all happened by chance?
Absolutely, and they would be the two passages that I would go to that speak to the natural revelation of God. When the psalmist says that the heavens declare the glory of God, what's the word glory? The glory means his greatness being revealed, his attributes being revealed. And so the scriptures itself say that not only can we look to Scripture's special revelation, but we can also look to the natural revelation to know that there is a God, that everything didn't happen by chance, that we are not cosmic accidents. And then, as I always tell our students when I'm teaching my apologetics class, just the design of the universe, the design of the human body demands a designer. It points to the intricate design that can only be explained by a chief designer who we call God. But all of those natural evidences from creation and from the material world speak to there being a designer, and ultimately we know him as the creator God.
You know, another aspect of that is just the fine-tuning that we have. If we look in the telescopes and the far dimensions of space, we see quite a bit of evidence that there are various parameters for the universe, even our own Milky Way galaxy, our solar system, even Earth, that are all intricately balanced. It's almost like you have a series of dials in a room, and one turn a little to the left, a little to the right, and you don't have a universe, or you don't have a solar system, or it isn't working right. Sometimes they even refer to this as a Goldilocks universe because everything is just right. But then when you look into your microscope, and we're going to try to see if we can get Tom DeRosa with us in just a minute, we also see then at these cellular level biological materials, transportation systems, a nucleus, DNA code, and a variety of others, which again are very fine-tuned. And so this seems to me to be another really powerful argument, which again, we've been saying that for millennia, but now science is sort of caught up with the Bible, and there are individuals that are looking at this now saying, boy, this sure looks like it was created. It's hard to explain all of this by some kind of cosmic accident. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. It's way too complicated to say that this all happened as a cosmic accident. It's way too complicated to say that this just happened through the evolutionary theory that Darwin promoted back in the 19th century. And I think we need to be reminded, Darwin and eventually Marx and Engels, they were looking for a way in which God could be removed from society. They were looking at a secular state. They were looking for a secular explanation. So much of the evolutionary theory that was embraced and the atheistic understanding of the world that was embraced in the 19th and 20th century, honestly, now we're finding out had at many times little to do with science and more to do with culture and politics.
Yes.
They had to explain away God. They had to explain away faith and religion as an explanation for the origin of the universe. But when we're honest with ourselves and we're honest about history, we realize that the greatest scientists and innovators in the history of the world were believers in a God. They were theists because they were too smart to make the assumption and the conclusion that this all happened through evolutionary experience.
Very good. Let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about the Creation Studies Institute and how that it relates to Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church and Coral Ridge Ministries and all sorts of other aspects of that as well. Need to take a break, and we will come back. If you'd like to know more about some of the things we're talking about, we've posted those articles and those links on our website at pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
Here's a phrase I sometimes use on radio. It's difficult to solve a problem when politicians won't even admit there's a problem. This is true about our national debt, but it's also true about America's health. We can't solve America's health problems if we won't admit that Americans are unhealthy. The confirmation of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. may be changing our mindset, but we still need to understand the depth of the healthcare problem in America. We've heard that America is a first world country facing third world health issues. When you hear that, it sounds too extreme. Is that true? You can read an article in the Annual Review of Public Health that attempts to answer why do Americans have shorter life expectancy and worse health than people in other high-income countries. It's even worse for poor Americans. One research paper on life expectancy in the United States says this: the poorest men in the U.S. have life expectancies comparable to men in Sudan and Pakistan. The richest men in the U.S. live longer than the average man in any country. A CDC research paper documents that 6 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic disease, and 4 in 10 have 2 or more chronic diseases. And it's worth mentioning that chronic disease may account for as much as 3/4 of America's healthcare spending. Another study in the New England Journal of Medicine on the prevalence of adult obesity and severe obesity made this ominous prediction. The researchers estimated by 2030 nearly half of U.S. adults will be obese. These statistics and many others illustrate the need to address the health of Americans. There are solutions to the problem, but the first step is to admit that there's a problem and understand the depth of our healthcare problem. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, Dr. Robert Pacienza with us, and we've not been able to connect up with Tom DeRosa, so we'll maybe just spend a little bit of time for a few more minutes talking about the Creation Studies Institute as well as that Creation Museum and a few other things. But one of the things you mentioned, Rob, just a minute ago reminded me of a piece that's in Stephen Meyer's book, The Return of the God Hypothesis, because he says, when you came to the end of the 19th century, you had Charles Darwin, Karl Marx, and Sigmund Freud. Darwin, from biology, told us where we came from. Marx, with his secular eschatology, told us where we were going. And Freud, with his psychology, told us about the human condition. And by the end of the 19th century, had this materialistic worldview that answered all the basic questions that the Judeo-Christian religion had always answered. But then you come into the 20th century and all sorts of scientific discoveries, everything from the Big Bang to the fine-tuning of the universe and fine-tuning of biology, and that's why he calls it the return of the God hypothesis. And it really is a great time to be alive. And I remember in the old days that when D. James Kennedy developed all those great ministries at Coral Ridge Ministries, one of those was this idea of creation. And when I was at NRB, I was talking with one of your associates, Susan, about the fact that you were bringing back the Creation Studies Institute. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Creation Studies Institute was founded in the mid-'90s, actually along with D. James Kennedy and my chemistry teacher from school, Tom DeRosa, who unfortunately we're not able to have on the show today. But they really believed that there needed to be an institute that helped to train the next generation of Christians, particularly as they went off into college, how they would defend their faith, but particularly defend the position of creation, and how important that was, not just for science, but also for culture and society. That ministry spun off about 10 years later, but just as of the new year, we have brought it back home under the Coral Ridge Ministries umbrella. Tom has been not only a teacher, but now a longtime friend, and we really felt like we were better together than apart. Mm-hmm. We believe that Creation Studies Institute, as I said, not only speaks to those that are interested in science and the origin of the universe, but also speaks to the cultural issues of the day. If you take God and the idea that God is the creator out of society and out of culture, the whole culture falls apart. There's no absolute being, there's no absolute truth. If there's no absolute truth and an absolute morality, then the culture really just begins to crumble in chaos. So we really believe that Creation Studies Institute has an important role in the Coral Ridge family of ministries in order to equip people in the cultural mandate and in order to defend their faith.
Well, and again, you know how much young people love dinosaurs, and they're really interested in fossils, or they're interested in bugs or whatever, and there are field trips, there are speaking engagements, but also a creation museum. And I was thinking about that the other day in terms of our geography. We broadcast all over the country, just as you do with your radio and TV ministry. And, you know, you've come to Dallas, there's the Institute for Creation Research, Discovery Institute. If you're up in kind of the Cincinnati area, of course, our friends Answers in Genesis have a creation museum, and the Ark experience there. Over in Nashville, you've got the Wonder Center. But now to have a creation museum in Florida, I think is just another great opportunity for people to go and to have sort of a hands-on experience.
Absolutely. We daily have field trips from homeschool groups to Christian day schools, even to, believe it or not, some public schools in the areas come as well, just to show the other viewpoint. Just to show the other side of scientific theory, the origin of the universe. But this is a place where we have elementary students, middle school students, even high school students come. It's all of the fossils, and the Creation Museum is housed in partnership with our friends at South Florida Bible College in Deerfield Beach, Florida. And they've been gracious enough to house the fossils and to house the Creation Studies Museum. And it's a great way to teach the story of the Bible from the very beginning, to show that in the beginning was God, and God created the heavens and the earth. And just a great hands-on way of sharing the story of origin, to share that there is a God, and that you put God at the center of all things from the very beginning. It changes the whole story of history.
Well, again, we have a link to creationstudies.org. So those of you that might be traveling and would like to go to that museum, that is certainly the case. But even though Tom is not here, certainly you know him pretty well, he wrote this book years ago called Evolution's Fatal Flaw, How Darwin's Tree of Life Brought Death to Millions. And I know that you and Dr. Kennedy over the years have documented the sad reality of what happens when you start with the assumption that there is no God, there are no ethics, there is no absolute standard. And I know that while we're celebrating 50 years of Coral Ridge Ministries, started back there in 1974, that we're really excited about the need to get some of these videos that you have produced over the years out to remind people that there is a real consequence to believing in creation, and there are some real downfalls and difficulties in believing with evolution. And at a time when sometimes the answer from a lot of the Christian schools is to say, you know, we'll just teach evolution and say God did it, theistic evolution. But that doesn't work out so well, does it?
It really doesn't. And I'm so glad you mentioned Tom's book that we eventually turned into a documentary, which you can find at watch.crm.tv, where you can stream that documentary that we did, that really showcases through history how Darwin has influenced, and as I said earlier, not only influenced the sciences, but also influenced culture and society. It is Darwin that influenced Marx. It's Darwin that influenced Hitler. It's Darwin that influenced Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood. So when we think about Darwin and Darwinian evolution, we have to go way beyond just the scope of scientific theory to understand his impact and the fatal flaws that he brought to the Western world.
I might just mention, just before I let you go, that, of course, we've been talking about creation evolution, but I know, if I remember right, you're from Philadelphia, and you have just a real heart to really recognize that a year from now, we're going to be talking about the 250th anniversary of this country. And as a matter of fact, one of the video series you have out already is One Nation Under God. And even though I have 2 of my degrees in science, my other degree is in American history and American government, because I recognize how important that is as well. So one of the projects I know you're going to be working on over this next year is this whole idea of the need for us to come back to biblical roots. Part of that is creation, but the other part of that is just, again, recognizing the faith of the founders and what we have been able to enjoy here in the United States of America.
Absolutely. We need to embrace and relearn and help re-educate the next generation that this nation was founded as one nation under God, that there is a Christian heritage that should be embraced and celebrated. And we haven't gone public with this yet, but I'm pleased to announce on radio that we will be launching an initiative here in the next few months called Celebrate America, so stay tuned. To celebrate the 250th anniversary of America and our Christian heritage. We're going to do faith and freedom tours, more documentaries. We're going to be producing curriculum for the next generation. So a lot of exciting things coming as we approach the 250th anniversary and the Celebrate America initiative at Coral Ridge Ministries.
And again, you can go to crm.tv. Of course, we already have that on our website, so you can follow that. You can even find out a little bit more about some of the videos we've just been talking about. And, of course, we also have a link that we've also provided there as well to creationstudies.org. And we'll just see if we can get Tom on in the future. But you've done enough radio to know that sometimes you just have to be flexible. And so I appreciate you giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, I'm going to get into a couple of other issues in the news. It didn't turn out quite that way, but we will do our best to maybe come back and educate you a little bit more about creation. But again, think about this. If you've got young children, grandchildren that maybe are kind of interested in the sciences, I mean, I just mentioned a minute ago, have the Institute for Creation Research just down the road from where we're broadcasting today in the Dallas area. Of course, you have Answers in Genesis. So many people know about their Creation Museum and the Ark Experience. Over in Nashville, you have the Wonder Center. And then, of course, now we're talking about the Creation Studies Museum in Florida. So just some great places to go to really give them a hands-on experience. And they get so excited. And I think this is a great opportunity for you to learn a little bit more. So again, go to the website, pointofview.net, and you'll find out about these various organizations. And as you go there, hope you'll remember that we're going to later this month have our Truth Team anchored to truth, and you can actually join with us now. As a matter of fact, we're hoping some of you might want to give ahead of time so we can use that maybe as a challenge for others that would want to support this ministry. All that is available at the website, pointofview.net. When we come back, I've got a half an hour left. I'm sure I can put it to good use. We'll take a break, be back with more right after this.
In 19th century London, 2 towering historical figures did battle, not with guns and bombs, but words and ideas. London was home to Karl Marx, the father of communism, and legendary Baptist preacher Charles Spurgeon. London was in many ways the center of the world, economically, militarily, and intellectually. Marx sought to destroy religion, the family, and everything the Bible supports. Spurgeon stood against him, warning of socialism's dangers. Spurgeon understood Christianity is not just religious truth, it is truth for all of life. Where do you find men with that kind of wisdom to stand against darkness today? Get the light you need on today's most pressing issues delivered to your inbox when you sign up for the Viewpoints commentary at pointofview.net/signup. Every weekday in less than 2 minutes, you'll learn how to be a person of light to stand against darkness in our time. It's free, so visit pointofview.net/signup right now. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we're going to spend some time, if we can, get into some of the issues in the news. But let me just mention that tomorrow we have Keisha Russell be in studio with us. We're going to talk about her book, Uncommon Courage. I think you'll really appreciate that conversation. We'll get back into some other topics as well. My commentary today is entitled Unhealthy America. Why did I write it? Well, I think we, as I've said many times on this program before, can't solve a problem if we don't think we have a problem. The best example of that is that up until fairly recently, people have acted like the national debt of the United States isn't a big issue, and it is a big issue, and it's gotten bigger every single year. Politicians don't want to talk about it. Members of the government don't want to talk about it. The federal departments want to continue spending money and don't want to think about austerity. So it's a need to talk about that. And I think the other one that fits into this category is we are not a healthy nation, and we can't fix it if we can't admit there's a problem. Now, I do believe that there are some ideas that might actually make a difference. There is help on the horizon that might make a difference, and one of those is the confirmation of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as the head of the as Secretary of Health and Human Services. But I still think we need to understand kind of the depth, and even if I could be blunt, the breadth of the healthcare problem in America. And so what I did was pick out a couple of phrases I've heard people say. Sometimes Robert F. Kennedy has said this. Other individuals that have been on various talk shows have said this. And I thought, okay, let me put the phrase out there and then see with just a simple Google or Bing search, I can find something, and I did. I didn't even try to provide all the links, although I noticed Karen did on one from the New England Journal of Medicine. But the idea was this isn't a controversial statement. These are being made all the time in very reputable journals. Here's the first one. You've probably heard, if you've been around any length of time, that America is a first world country facing third world health issues. Now, that sounds pretty extreme. Well, I suggest you might want to read one article I found was the Annual Review of Public Health, which had the title, Why Do Americans Have Shorter Life Expectancy and Worse Health Than People in Other High-Income Countries? Now, if you dig into that, you can actually find a research paper that makes it even worse and more concerning because the healthcare problems we have are the worst for the poor and maybe the best for the rich. And so just as we talk about a wage gap, which I may get into in just a minute, we also have a health gap, and that needs to be addressed. One research paper on life expectancy in the United States had this remarkable statement, and that is the poorest men in the U.S. have life expectancies comparable to men in Sudan or Pakistan. Can you believe that? And the other part of that is the richest men in the United States live longer than the average man in any country. So obviously, we see that when you have access to quality health care, you do better. Now, of course, the natural jump, and I think it's the illogical jump is, well, then that's why we have to have the government take over the healthcare system. No, that makes it worse. But I won't even get into that. I'm just trying to raise the issue. We can then talk about solutions, but you can't talk about solutions to a problem unless you acknowledge there's a problem. And so that's one. Here's another one. This one comes from the CDC, so you know that's probably accurate. Research paper says that 6 in 10 Americans have at least one chronic disease, and 4 in 10 have 2 or more chronic diseases. Now, that's a phrase I've heard a number of people make, including Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, just think that through for a minute. A chronic disease. Now, some chronic diseases are congenital. You're born with that particular disease. You're born with that particular genetic problem. You're born with something because of not coming out the birth canal properly, or you contracted it early on. But many of these chronic diseases are self-imposed. But whether they came from the womb or whether they came from lifestyle choices, we have a majority of Americans, 6 in 10, have at least one chronic disease. Now let's get into the political part of it. It is worth mentioning that the chronic diseases that we have may actually account for as much as 3/4 of America's healthcare spending. So you can see that we're not just talking about an unhealthy America. We're also talking about a very significant amount of money that we spend to address those chronic diseases. And again, let's compare what we find in other countries. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is convinced that some of that has to do, of course, with the food that we eat. He's going to be talking about that. Some of it has to do with all sorts of other factors, and he may also be willing to look at certain kind of vaccines that are helpful or not so helpful. So we'll see where all that takes us, if indeed we want to use a gold standard of actually a true evaluation of scientific outcomes. One more, and that is the New England Journal of Medicine on the prevalence of adult obesity and severe obesity. Again, made this prediction. The researchers estimated by 2030, nearly half of U.S. adults will be obese, and a percentage of those will be what are called severe obese. We used to call them morbidly obese, but I think we've cleaned up the language. The point I'm making, pretty simple. That is, if we're going to make America healthy again, which is kind of the theme of Robert F. Kennedy, maybe what we need to do is address some of these issues. Let me, as we were talking about that, get into another issue, and that is one of the desires of President Trump is to return manufacturing back to America. And so I've got a commentary coming out which picks up on something I said earlier this month on what you might call the skills gap. Because again, if we really want to make America great and want to make manufacturing great for American workers, you've got to ask a fundamental question. Who's going to fill those jobs? The Bureau of Labor Statistics shows about 7.6 million job openings right now. 7.6 million job openings right now. And you also have, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 6.8 million unemployed workers. Now you might say, well, then why can't we get these unemployed workers into these open jobs, right? Because we have all these job openings. It's almost a one-to-one match, but it's not. And the reason for that is we have two problems. Mike Rowe talked about that the other day in an interview that he did. I think it was on Fox News, or maybe it was Fox Business, but wherever it was. Anyway, he's the host, of course, of Dirty Jobs and a number of other things. He says we have a skills gap and we have a will gap. The skills gap we've talked about on this program before. There's a disparity between what the employer expects an employee to have in terms of skills and the actual skills that employee has. And of course, that's true for many of these high-end jobs. If you want to get a job in the medical field, you have to have a science degree. If you want to get a job in high tech or big tech, probably going to have a computer degree. But a lot of these jobs are actually what we would consider kind of blue-collar skills jobs, which require mechanical ability and training. But unfortunately, we, as a country, we've removed shops classes from a lot of high schools. And so we have a whole generation that really maybe would like to work with their hands, but they haven't been trained to do so. And so as a result, we've instead told all these students that you need to go to college, even if they probably would be better if they didn't go to college. They take out these massive student loans to get a degree that might not even help them prepare for a future job. But the other side of that is not only is there a skills gap, there's a will gap. And I've talked about that earlier in one of my commentaries, but we're going to bring it up again. The economist Nicholas Eberstadt wrote a book a number of years ago in a column in the Washington Post that I quote called Flight from Work. And that is, he lamented that at that time there were about 7 million men who were not working and not looking for work. Now, it turns out that 3 years later, that has dropped a little bit, but really just a percentage point. We still have we have millions and millions of non-working men, individuals that are not working, not looking for work. And I think that fits into what I might call the will gap. And so, again, if we're going to bring these jobs back to America, we're going to have manufacturing return to America. Who's going to fill those jobs? And I think we're going to have to start talking about that, as we will be talking about that right here on Point of View. Let's take a break. We've got some more to cover. I'll do that right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention that I guess I looked it up here. March 4th is when I talked about this idea of flight from work. And at that time, we were talking about 7 million men ages 25 to 54 who are not working and not looking for work. Now, the economist Nicholas Eberstadt actually referred to that as flight from work. And again, when you have that situation, at that time, you had about 11 million unfilled jobs. Now, it's a little bit lower in terms terms of those who aren't working and also lower the number of jobs. But those jobs are going to increase if we bring those back. These various mechanical jobs and machinery jobs and car-making jobs and others that went overseas are going to be reestablished here. And who's going to be there? And again, Mike Rowe has, of course, his Mike Rowe Works Foundation, in which he's encouraging individuals. I think the last time I looked, he had, $12 million of various grants that he's given out there. So that's been very significant. But again, there is a real need right now for welders and steam fitters and pipe fitters and mechanics and things like that. None of those require a 4-year degree. He says, actually, there's a greater need for skilled workers now than ever before. And he said, if you're inclined to think that way and work that way, the world is your oyster. But again, we're going to have to encourage individuals to actually go out and work. And I think this is going to be something that pastors and parents and either other leaders are going to have to encourage the next generation to work. And part of it gets back to this idea of will. And that is, we actually pay people not to work. If you think about this, the benefits sometimes in being on the welfare rolls are significant. And it brings me to another piece that I came across over the weekend. And that has to do with universal basic income. Now, if you've listened to this program any length of time, you may have heard the interviews we've done with Chuck Bentley. Chuck Bentley is the CEO of Crown Financial Ministries, and he has actually written about universal basic income called UBI, even has a chapter in his book, 7 Gray Swans, because he's concerned that, first of all, giving free money to everyone, first of all, doesn't make any sense economically. And it doesn't make any sense theologically. People benefit from working. I have a booklet that we've done on work, and the theology of work is certainly important, and we should enjoy the fruits of our labor. And so the argument being made is, well, with AI going to be replacing a lot of jobs, and that's quite possible, AI is probably going to do to maybe white-collar workers what robots have done for some blue-collar workers. But you're still going to have opportunities for people to work and use their hands, their minds, whatever, head, heart, hands, whatever they use is the case. But over the weekend, I saw this research came from the National Bureau of Economic Research, and they published a study on UBI, Universal Basic Income. It was summarized in a lengthy thread. That's how I first found it. And what they found is by giving money to people in Compton, California, they would give them as much as $500 per month in free money. What did that do? Did they improve their standard of living? Did they use some of that money to go out and educate themselves so they could get a good job? Did that maybe free up their creative endeavors so that they could become painters or actors or whatever it might be? And the answer is no. The participants usually ended up maybe only being $100 richer, if that. And most of them smoked more cigarettes. That's all we came up with. Again, I'll just give you a summary of some of this, but it just illustrates, again, giving out money doesn't work. Again, they found, for example, quote, receiving guaranteed income had no impact on the labor supply of full-time workers. In other words, if I give them a little bit more money, maybe they would be a full-time worker. Nope. Actually, what it found is part-time workers actually lowered their labor participation. Oh, if you're going to give me some money, I probably won't even work part-time. I'll just live off the money. Not surprising. Number two, they found that there was no overall effect on the indices of psychological well-being or financial well-being. And that shouldn't surprise us, because you might remember that we've had on this program a man by the name of Arthur Brooks. And Arthur Brooks has written quite a bit about happiness. And his studies and others show that happiness and fulfillment come from what he calls earned success. That is, people who work hard and thus receive the benefit of their work are much happier and much more fulfilled. By contrast, people that, for example, win the lottery, they aren't as happy. Or individuals that receive some kind of inheritance aren't as happy. There is something to be said about the way in which human beings are constructed that earned success leads to happiness. Again, a key verse would be Proverbs 13, verse 11. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers it little by little will increase it. It sounds a little bit like Chad Hufford. Remember, we've had him on the program here talking about if you want to be a millionaire, you add a little bit each time. Matter of fact, those of you that are younger, start early because it's easier to actually have $1 million when you retire if you start saving money now. But again, the Bible is very clear that he who gathers wealth little by little will increase it. But someone who gets it hastily, they lose it. You know, there are a good number of football players and actors and others that have been completely gone broke because all the money came in at a short amount of time. And there's some other players, Gronk is one of those, that actually spends very little. Matter of fact, I think he only spends the money he gets from shoe manufacturers and endorsements and leaves all the rest because he's seen what has happened so often. And we've all seen it. Wealth gained hastily really will dwindle away, and we've seen it time and time again. So just one more issue, universal basic income. Hey, if we pay everybody, then they'll be freed up to engage in all sorts of creative activities. Maybe they'll go back to school and they'll learn a trade. Well, according to the National Bureau of Economic Research, this one didn't work out so well. This one was in Compton, California, but I can point you to other ones, but this is the latest one to remind us once again, when you pay people not to work, guess what? They don't work. And so again, if we're going to actually make America great again, or as I talked about earlier, make America healthy again, we're going to have to change some behaviors that haven't been very helpful and are not going to actually contribute to human flourishing. Well, that's enough for my soapbox today, but if you would like to know more about some of these issues, we have all of that available at our website at pointofview.net. Emma Freire's article is up there, and you, of course, can find others on World Magazine and the rest. We also have some information about the Creation Studies Institute, even though we didn't have a chance to talk with Tom DeRosa. We'll get him on in the future. We'll talk about intelligent design. We'll talk about creation, talk about some of the dangers of believing in evolution, but that will be for another day. Again, I hope you'll enjoy the conversation tomorrow. I hope you'll join us tomorrow because I'm looking forward to an entire hour with Keisha Russell as we get into her book, Uncommon Courage. It's a book that you'll certainly want to get a copy of. And if you find yourself saying, well, I'd like to be able to get some of these articles on a regular basis, you might consider making sure that you actually put the pointofview.net into your favorites. And I hope that some of you might also consider clicking on that button that says Donate Now and supporting this ministry. Most important, I want to thank Megan for help engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. I look forward to seeing you tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Are you confused about changes happening in Washington, D.C.? Well, you're not alone. Are you frustrated that you can't get the full picture of what's happening from the mainstream media? You are not alone in that either. And that is why Americans need a voice they can trust, a voice that provides accurate news, trustworthy information, and most importantly, a voice that is anchored to God's Word. Point of View is that voice, but we need you. In just a few weeks, Point of View will celebrate Truth Team Week, where we encourage listeners like you to join the team of people keeping truth on the air. But you don't have to wait to make a difference. You can make a difference right now by visiting us online at pointofview.net and join the team. That's pointofview.net. Or you can call us toll-free to join at 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just wanted to tell you, too, how much I have appreciated Point of View over the years. I've always been taught that we take care of our own, and I feel like Point of View is one of our own because of the Christian worldview that you do promote. And so I have become a partner today, and I just want to thank you so much, and just God bless you for all that you do.
Listen, I wanted to make a quick comment. I'm a relatively new listener to the show, and I really kind of stumbled upon it more than anything because I'm doing some driving now that I wasn't in the past. And my comment really is, I think you guys and gals are more right on about the assessment of this country right now than anything I've heard. You know, I go home and I tell my wife, you've got to hear what they're talking about on the show. It's just so right on. And I tell my parents the same thing.
I'm 25 years old, and I started listening to Point of View about 4 years ago, and it has changed the way that I think and the way that I view the world around me.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.